Yes, that's the point. So we're being recorded, so don't say anything crazy and we'll be fine. So, Adam, why don't you introduce yourself?
Okay. I'm Adam Chiarella. I also worked with Tim. Been working at Bastion for 2 years now. Before that, I was getting my master's degree in aerospace engineering, and before that, I was working pre-construction as an estimator. And then before that, I got my mechanical engineering degree.
How much experience have you had with Deming? Have you read any of his works, or are you a beginner?
About a week. Besides the what was the there was a book that you had lent me, I believe it was a year ago. I couldn't remember if that was Deming or not. It was
Yeah, I
another
don't remember.
statistical book. I can't remember if that was Deming.
Yeah, no, I don't think it was one of Deming's. But that's okay. You're a beginner. I can't remember who's online.
My name's Dennis Golick.
Dennis,
I work with Bill at CSUN. He teaches a course there, and I teach a couple courses.
So you're in the States.
I'm in the States now, and I'm up in the Seattle area.
Oh, that's where I was born.
Did they kick you out, or did you leave?
I was two. My dad's a native Californian, but we went to Nebraska first. So then we got back to California. So Dennis, how much experience do you have with Dr. Deming's work? Have you applied any of it anywhere?
I got a fair bit. I've learned a lot from Mr. Bill. I've been to two of Deming's 4-day sessions back in the 90s and have been following him since then.
Well, that's great. So we've got beginners to more experienced people. And the idea behind this whole thing, I always find it interesting. And Kevin in the second edition talks about it in the foreword when he read his grandfather's book once and then was told to read it again, and he read it again and found things he'd missed. I've probably read it 40 times, and at least every third time I find something I've missed. So there's a lot in there. And the idea is to talk, to help each other understand what we think is being said and how that can apply or should apply. Adam, I know you have a second edition. Dennis, what have you got, a first edition? I mean, a second edition or a third?
I got all three.
Yeah, okay. Yeah, the second and the third aren't different except the page numbers, which is, and a new chapter added, which is just annoying rather than anything else. So let's take a look. I don't know. Let's take a look. I want to call attention to it, something that I found very intriguing when I saw that Dr. Deming got a PhD in mathematical physics, and the year he graduated was 1928. And why I'm surprised by that, I'm sort of a physics nut anyway, is he had to learn a bunch of statistics, which he ended up being famous for, because he was working at a time when Heisenberg and the uncertainty principle and all that quantum stuff had just come into existence. And so what I was thinking about when I saw that is when he talks about a transformation, because he does in several places, he's talking about we need a transformation. He's talking about moving from Newton's world to Einstein and Heisenberg's world. That's way different than you might think of a transformation. So when Deming talks about transformation, he's talking about throwing the baby out with the bathwater and starting over. What did you see in the preface or the foreword that struck you as interesting, intriguing, probably not worrisome? Okay, well, let's jump into how are we doing? Overall, what's Deming's thought on how we're doing?
Feels like it's we're doing okay, but there's a lot of room for improvement.
Yeah, I see a lot of places where he's talking to us about what's going on and where we used to be in the States and where we are now. But it's not limited to the States. As I think he points out, a lot of companies all over the world are run with what he calls the prevailing style of management. I love in his preface where he's trying to help management transform. And so for management to transform, they have to listen to him. And he starts off the preface with, this book is for people who are living under the tyranny of the prevailing style of management. Doesn't sound like a good way to get them on his side. But that's how he sees what's going on. We're stuck, we're trapped. What strikes you about his definition of quality? A product or service possesses quality if it helps somebody and enjoys a good and sustainable market. What do you notice about that definition?
Yeah, it's the first time I'd ever seen the part where it says help somebody. I mean, I've seen some quality beers and some quality cigarettes, but I don't think that really ever helped anybody.
Well, they think it helps them. That's why it enjoys a sustainable market.
Well, and that's the part that I've always had problems with the Deming crowd is a sustainable market. Especially if you look at the age that we're in now with the advancement of technology going so fast, you can get something that's very quality and it's obsolete in 2 years. And I've always had discussions with the Deming folks. We go back and forth, but that's always the thing that's always troubled me with that.
Oh, I really like that a sustainable market, because you can improve quality the way a whole bunch of people define quality, as you say. It's a quality of product, but if you don't look to the future and see what you can do to serve your current clients and maybe new clients with a different kind of product, you're going to find yourself to have the highest quality, lowest cost buggy whips in the world, but nobody needs buggy whips.
But that's true, but you said you have the highest quality. So again, the definition of quality, we can't use the word in the definition, but B, it's just the matter of time frame. And I disagree with the time frame involved.
Yeah, it's pretty fast now. It's hard to keep ahead. But what Deming's always talking about is the system that we're in includes the future. And so you have to do something about setting yourself up so that you don't end up being out of business because you're a carburetor manufacturer. A whole bunch of the
Agreed.
definitions of quality have to do with meeting specifications or meeting some physical kind of a thing, as opposed to the,
Yeah, a lot of it is meeting customer needs.
Yeah.
And, that's not necessarily what quality is.
it's pretty fuzzy. The thing I also like about the definition is, if cheap toys does somebody some good, you may have a sustainable business with some pretty what you might consider low quality, not lasting, not reliable toys. But if that meets somebody's needs, that's quality. If somebody else comes in and takes over because they make toys that last longer or more intriguing, then you're out of business. So you don't have that sustainable market. So what does Deming think we ought to do, being in the position we're in, which for him, as Adam said, seems to need a lot of improvement? As you said, Dennis.
Well, I've read on page 4, what must we do? And it's very salient to what we are right now. We in North America may accept the fact we are no longer excel in manufacturing. I wonder if we could say that to a certain president and what he would say to that,
I know, and Deming's talking about 30 years ago when he wrote this book.
Exactly.
Yeah, and the president thinks he can force the manufacturing back. That's going to be interesting. You talk, Dennis, about customer expectations. Deming says there's much talk about customer expectations. Meet the customer's expectation. The fact is the customer expects only what you and your competitor have led him to inspect. And he's a rapid learner, meaning if somebody else comes up with something different and better, he's going to bail on you. He also, I think it's even common today, there's a general belief that somehow the customer comes up with the ideas for new products. And Deming's offering the customer doesn't come up with any ideas, but he's a fast learner. And if he finds an idea that's working better for him, like electric lights instead of gas lights, like tubed tires instead of wooden tires, like fuel injection instead of carburetors, he'll move right away very quickly. So you can have very loyal customers and very happy customers, and they'll leave you in a second. And as you talk about, Dennis, in the current age, things are changing even faster than they were in the 80s and 90s when Deming was thinking about all this stuff. So he says, innovation comes from the entrepreneur who thinks he can invent something that he can produce and it will enjoy a sustainable market. So that's where the ideas come from. And he finds out very soon, like Betamax compared to VCRs. Betamax found out they made something that was pretty darn good, but it didn't last. The VCR took over. And most technical experts think the visual acuity of the Beta was much better. But it wasn't what the customers wanted, so they left Beta or didn't start up with enough of them.
And I like the similar analogy that he mentions with the carburetors about how fewer readers every year. I mean, me personally, I've never actually had to deal with one. I've only heard about them in passing, but
Yeah.
it's only going to shrink exponentially as time goes on.
Yep. And and that, yeah, he talks about a system, which an organization has to have a purpose. And Russ Akoff used to remind us that people who believe for-profit companies that their purpose is making a profit have misunderstood rather severely. Russ says their purpose is not, it's that making a profit is a necessary condition for survival. It's not their purpose. And in the world of biology, human biology, most people recognize that for humans to survive, a necessary condition is breathing in oxygen and breathing out CO2. But nobody confuses that with man's purpose. But with corporations, Deming's offering they don't really know what their purpose is. Most organizations don't have a purpose, which is the start of the problem when you got a whole, especially when you have 1,000 people working for you. And if you don't know the purpose and they don't know the purpose, you're kind of going to struggle. He also points out, because it was popular, especially in the 80s and even the 90s, and it may still be popular several places, that the definition of quality was driving toward the history of quality. If you read through Feigenbaum and Duran and the guys that were before in Deming's time, everything was focused on defects and eliminating defects. And what Deming pointed out is that eliminating defects is fine, but it's not sufficient. What you need to do is be able to create things on the figure on figure 2, style and things that have style, performance, and there's demand for the product, and you keep that going and improving those things, while at the same time you lower the defects. That's the way to go. But if what you do is start lowering the defects without regard for what your purpose is and what you're trying to make, you're not going to get very far.
And I think that's with our back and forth with our friends in Lean. That's their focus is on reducing waste, and oftentimes they forget about the purpose.
Yeah, it's my mental model tells me that they're trapped the way Russ Akoff said a lot of folks are trapped. They're focused on efficiency. They're preoccupied with efficiency instead of focusing on effect. And effect has to do with your purpose. I remember Deming being asked once something about something. The guy asked a question, and whatever had been, whatever thing the guy was talking about, the guy said, "Well, do you see that as a failure?" And Deming said, "It depends on what the purpose was. Might be a success." So I always look at Lean and Six Sigma as really focusing on the method, but method without purpose might increase your efficiency, although it's not guaranteed. But without understanding what you're trying to do, the purpose. Everything starts with purpose and then goes from there. Russ mentioned, you've probably heard this, Dennis, Russ Akoff used to come to Rocketdyne frequently every year and talk to us, but he talks about when you're focused on efficiency, what happens is you lose sight of what you're trying to accomplish, and he defines efficiency as doing things right. So you have a process or a procedure or a way of doing business, and you do that better and better and better. That's working on efficiency. But he offers that if you're doing the wrong thing, you're doing things right, but you're doing the wrong thing, you're getting worse and worse. One of his statements is, the righter you do the wrong thing, the wronger you get. And my view of the Lean Six Sigma world is they're doing a lot of improving the wrong thing.
Or they don't know when to stop.
Yeah, at a certain point, the return on investment is pretty low.
Oh, or the customer, the classic example is well, not classic, one example I should say is the cup holders in the minivans that the Toyota went out, and the senior engineer went and looked and said, okay, we need the mothers want these, and Six Sigma guys took one and they got it certain. They kept getting certain widths, but Toyota said, hey, mothers have different size cups. You got to get something big. It doesn't have to be one size. You just got to be able to put certain things in there. And it's again, it just goes to Six Sigma. They just want to go from 5 Sigma to 6 Sigma, and whether the customer wants it or not.
Yes. And the other thing, the Six Sigma folks that I knew were very much, they might claim that's not what they believe, but the way they did things was very much displaying a belief that if you improve an element of the system, you will make the system better. And that's generally false. And sometimes when you quote improve one part of the system, you destroy the system entirely. There's a classic example here that Rocketdyne from, I don't know, the late 60s, before I got here, but I heard the story. They had a part that's a disc, and it has, they got to make something out of it that's going to help pump fuel. So they have to weld these blades around this thing, and the spec was interesting. It said you had to use, I think it was 52 to 55 blades. So there was some variation there. Interestingly enough, it seems to me there'd be a lot of variation in performance, but that's a whole nother thing. And when Rocketdyne when Rocketdyne got organized and decided they were going to improve quality, and they'd been making these things for years, but in the 90s, they decided this quality improvement thing was important. And Rocketdyne made the mistake of telling every department it had to have a quality activity going on. So there was always variation in the discs, and there was always variation in the width of the blades. And what the guys have been doing for years is they'd stack the blades around the disc before they started welding. And the rule was there's supposed to be no gaps and no overlaps. And so with a lot of variation in the blades, they could stack them up. And if there was a gap or an overlap, they could change blades out because the blades had a lot of variation in them. So they got no gap and then they'd weld them up. Well, the blade department decided as their continuous improvement activity that improvement would be reduce the variation in the blades. So they probably got an award for it too. I don't know if they did or not, but they reduced the variation in the blades way down, almost no variation. I mean, there was some variation in the blades, and sent the first lot of blades down to the shop floor. And when the blades got to the place where they needed to be welded onto the disc, the guy stacked some discs up there and they had a gap, and no amount of exchanging blades was going to close the gap. So improving the blade process, or improving the blades taken by themselves, ended up shutting down the activity for a while. And that's what I see from Lean and Six Sigma. And I also noticed that people who have read Deming's 14 points, and he talks about improving the system continuously and relentlessly and forever, but they seem to misread it because it's not improve everything everywhere all the time. And the thing you're improving is the system of production and services. It's the system that you want to improve, not the pieces. What about you, Dennis? Have you seen Six Sigma and Lean folks who take into account anything other than the very narrow thing they're working on?
No, generally, from all the different companies I've worked at, they've, they work in silos, and that's what they get paid for, and they do something, they just throw it over the cubicle, and then they start something else. So it's very seldom do they integrate and work together for the common good type thing. It's only when someone reads the Riot Act and watches them for a period of time, then they will, but then they go back to their own turf and go back to their own things after a while.
Well, I would offer it's a lot easier to work on the pieces separately than it is to work on the system.
Oh, yeah.
So it's an easy way to go. It's just not very effective. Adam, what strikes you in here about what Deming said? How about the idea, this one sometimes gets people all riled up. How about the idea that a monopoly is not necessarily a bad thing? In fact, he says it has the best chance to work on the future because it's not struggling to survive. How does that strike you?
Yeah, that was a little interesting since one of the other points, I'm going to mess up the phrase, but he was talking about how a lousy competitor isn't as helpful as a good competitor.
Yeah.
So
Yeah,
that was a little confusing with the monopoly stuff.
Well, and he's got an interesting take on things having to do with monopolies. He says, just because they're big doesn't mean they're a problem. If they're big and they're not doing things like Bell was doing, Bell Telephone and Bell Labs were all one giant company. And they said, well, that's a monopoly. So they split it up. But when you split it up, you get a bunch of smaller telephone companies, and you don't have the resource. Those smaller telephone companies aren't putting any money into research. Bell Labs was doing research for the sake of research. They didn't even care if it applied to telephones. And so for Deming, they were living up to their obligation to the future, so they don't bother him. But there are companies who don't do that, and he thinks maybe those are the ones you want to go after. If they're not living up to their future, since they are in a position they can spend a lot of money on the future, they ought to be doing it. And I think his belief is that when they split up Bell, we got a bunch of telephone companies that weren't any better than Bell. And we lost some of the potential that Bell Labs had going for them with the money coming into them.
I think another thing to look at is the Japanese system with karetsus, with their intertwining with their suppliers and the banking system, the value chain.
Yeah.
And that served them very well in a quasi-monopoly type way.
Yeah, the US folks, no matter the auto industry, was always complaining they wanted to penetrate the Japanese market, but it was a monopoly and they weren't letting them in. But the US wasn't, they didn't have any idea what quality meant in the Japanese sense. They didn't offer, they might offer a little lower cost, but I'm not sure they could afford to offer a lower cost. The Japanese didn't know these guys. They've been working with some guy for years. They built this relationship with them. That relationship allows all kinds of interactions that help make the product and the system that it's going into better. And the US thought they were being excluded because of something other than that. Relationship is part of what makes what the Japanese do so strong. In fact, I remember somewhere, one of the videos, I was listening to Deming, and he talked about when he helped him understand what a system is. He said they understood it right away. They had no problem with it. And he had the big companies in Japan in one of his sessions, and they decided that the system was going to be the economy of Japan. So they were going to try to improve the economy of Japan as opposed to each of the individual companies like Mitsubishi and whoever else was floating around at the time, Toyota, all of those. That's very different. Yeah, and Adam, the competition thing is always intriguing because Deming in another areas talks about a story where on a corner near his house in the DC area, there were 2 gas stations, and one of them stayed open late at night on certain nights and closed down on others, and the other one stayed open on different nights from the one that I just talked about, so that the customers all over knew they could always get gas there. So one of them would be open, and the other thing they did is one of them had 2 tow trucks and the other one only had 1. So they made an agreement that the guy with only 1, they're out doing a job somewhere and something comes up that they need a tow truck for a different customer, the guy with 2 will loan him his truck so he can go get that and bring it back in. So they created sort of a little interaction with each other. Yes, they're competing, but they also recognize that cooperating with each other might benefit them both.
And another thing that comes back to today's politics is he talks about the cooperation of Ivy League institutions. And at the beginning, Columbia went by itself and they got, they didn't do well. Now Harvard is getting together with a bunch of people and putting together a fund to be able to react to this. So they're rediscovering their cooperation that they've lost in the past.
Deming offers, I don't remember if might be in the New Economics, but I remember he offers that partly because of our perception that capitalism was all competition, we don't even notice all of the cooperation that goes on. And examples are the, ANSI and all the industry standards. That's cooperation. They cooperate on a standard, so they all end up being better off. And it's not that you don't compete, it's that you cooperate on common problems and you compete in the marketplace with your solutions. And that's a way different perspective, I think. That I've always been fond of cooperation and playing soccer. And soccer is very competitive. But in order to have a soccer league, there's a lot of cooperation that has to go on. You have to get agreement on schedules, on places to play, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. There's a hell of a lot of cooperation. But boy, when you're on the field, there's a lot of competition, team to team, but there's a hell of a lot of cooperation within each team. It's when you recognize that capitalism might also include cooperation, you can see a lot of examples of cooperation that don't occur to you when your mental model is that everything's about competition. It's invisible to somebody who thinks everything's about that. Deming talks about that too. He talks about in competition with your competitors, Dennis might have a third of the market, Adam has a third of the market, I have a third of the market, and we could operate separately to try to get better. And Dennis gets better and ends up with 2/3 of the market, and I end up with only 1/6 of the market, and Adam's got the rest. And what Deming points out is you can do that, but what you're doing is you're slicing up the pie differently. And what he wants to do is increase the size of the pie. And you can compete by cooperating, you can increase the size of the pie and then compete within that larger pie.
That reminds me of a phrase I heard on Shark Tank one time, where the investors were discussing, since the presenters were not sure if they should take the deal or not, and they explained, well, right now you own a whole grape, but together you can own part of a watermelon.
Yeah. Yes. It is intriguing that here and there you see insight that if it got combined, one of the things that happened when I read Deming's book the first time, I knew stuff was wrong. I was a teacher for 8 years, and I knew stuff was wrong. The education system was intriguing, to say the least. And then working at Rocketdyne too, I knew things were wrong, and I was usually pretty good about badgering the people in charge about their wrongness, but I didn't have any way to explain how it was wrong and what they could do about it. And so then I read the New Economics, and in essence, it gave me a way to explain to them what could be done differently and better. It was eye-opening, to say the least. I discovered an intriguing thing that hasn't changed, and I don't know why, but my job as a teacher, I taught for 8 years, but my training for a teacher, what I was trained to do is how to write lesson plans and follow those plans and deliver curriculum. So I was, quote, teaching, if you call that teaching, but what I was really doing is delivering curriculum, which has nothing to do with learning. First of all, if you're teaching somebody something they don't want to learn, they aren't going to learn anything. They have to be open to learning, otherwise they're not going to learn. And that whole system was very tied up in delivering curriculum.
It still is.
Yes. And learning was accidental if it took place at all. So having a language and an ability to explain to others, Deming talks about that later, is if you want to change things, you have to have an idea and you have to be able to explain it in simple terms. Then you have to be able to rally some people to join you, because by yourself, you're probably not going to accomplish much. So there's more cooperation in order to make the transformation we need. Adam, what about the list of all the things we were trying to do there? A look at some of the usual suggestions for improving quality. And he's got, automation, new machinery, hard work, a whole bunch of stuff, 0 defects, motivate people. And he says, what? He says, those are all wrong.
Yeah, that kind of goes back to the red beads video. I just watched that today too.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
I didn't know he was going to bring up the upper and lower limits later, but I thought about that and then remembered at the beginning of the video that the qualifications for the inspector had to be that they had to be able to count up to 20. And then I
Yeah.
thought, well, that might be near where the upper limit is.
Yeah. Yeah.
But yeah, not mentioning management help or some of the process improvements being very vague, like best efforts doesn't really mean anything. It's to the effect of when somebody says they want to get in shape, but they didn't say what shape they want to get in.
Well, yeah, not to mention everybody doing his best efforts at what he thinks is the right thing.
Right.
Might be problematic. I don't know if I've told you, Adam. I know I haven't told Dennis. I was listening to, I'm a fan of football, the kind where you use your feet. And it was an under 17 women's World Cup and third place game. US is playing Japan women, and and it's a third place game in a tournament, which for you who don't play in tournaments, nobody wants to play a third place game. You lost the tournament, but you got to show up and play this damn game. So the announcer was trying to explain to us why it was important to watch the game. It was worth watching. She said, "This is a chance," talking about the American girls, a chance for the girls each of the girl to shine, to show what she can do, to do her best, so that the adult team can evaluate that, and she might make the adult team. And I thought about that. Well, there's improving the pieces without without improving the system, and not 20 minutes later, when the U.S. was losing, it was only 1-0, but they were losing. She makes the statement, "Those Japanese girls really work well together, making runs for each other and finding each other and creating spaces." And I said, "Do you understand? You just said the American team is supposed to every individual work the best she can do herself, and the Japanese are working with each other, and look who's winning."
Yeah, it's like watching an all-star game versus everybody that's been playing on the same team all season.
Exactly. Yeah. Russ had an example. He said that if you took in the NBA, if you took the best players in the NBA and created a team for them, an all-star team, and had them play in the rest of the league, said they wouldn't win the first year because they hadn't figured out how to play together. Said, but they might do very well the second year, but they won't all be all-stars. it's it's the interesting thing about sports and working together as a company is that the things you do to help a measure of how the quality of your output has to do with how many things do you do so it makes the other guy's job easier. And in sports, it's particularly visible, especially in soccer. You've got somebody in the center of the field runs toward the corner flag like crazy, not because she wants to end up with the ball, but because she wants a defender to chase her. So there's a space for a teammate to move into and take advantage of getting a shot off. And that it doesn't show up in the statistics. It doesn't show up anywhere. A lot of fans don't even recognize that it's a huge contribution to the game.
And I keep the example of football. 3 years ago, I went to the World Cup in Qatar, and there was a lot of discussion during the tournament that the vast majority of coaches were European coaches. They would go to Asian teams, they would go to African teams, Middle East teams, and very few Americans. And discussion was the Americans still haven't figured out how to play team sports, and so you had a market for a second tier European to go to a national team and help them, but the Americans still were struggling. So I thought that was very interesting.
Yeah, it is. I also find it very interesting that the women are able, and the U.S. women's national team are, with help from the NWSL and others, are able to develop players who can play together. And for some reason, the men's side can't do that worth a damn. Very odd to me. I'm sure they're operating out of different views of the world. Otherwise, there'd be more going on the men's side. Speaking of, the little thing you're doing to help others, in the Women's World Cup in '99 against China, they're in the Rose Bowl. Typically, Adam, I don't know how much you know about soccer, but typically when there's a corner kick, the opponents take a corner kick. The goalie's sort of halfway between the center and the goal, and between the posts. And one of the defenders goes on the far post from the corner and stands there, because in case the goalie can't get to the ball, there's at least a defender there that might be able to do something. And during the extra time of that World Cup, when in extra time, whoever scored first wins, there was a ball just like that over the goalie. Scurry couldn't get to it. And Christine Lilly was standing right near the corner post where she's supposed to be. This Japanese girl cracked the ball, and Lilly headed it away, and they went on playing, and then won in the overtime. And after the game, some of the sports officials were too busy worrying about who Scurry saving one of the penalty kicks and Chastain making the last kick, so we're jumping on them. But one of them managed to find Lilly and asked and said, "Wow, how do you feel?" He said, how excited are you about what you did? I mean, you saved the game for him. If you hadn't have been there heading that ball away on that corner kick, it would have been over." And and Lilly says, "Just doing my job." I just do my part to help.
Whatever makes it easier for everybody else.
Yes. It's hard to do. It's hard to do in American companies for sure, because we write job descriptions and then we beat on people about the job descriptions. But if you want to help somebody else, you actually have to watch. If you do something that gets handed off to them, you have to watch what they do with it in order for you to come up with ideas how you can help them. Because if you go ask, how can I help you? They don't have any idea. They'll tell you something, but they don't know. The example I used to use is, I'm doing something and I collect all this data and I get it organized and staple this 5-page report together and hand it on downstream. And then I ask, what can I do to help? And I'm watching the person saying, gee, I don't know what you could do better. As she gets out a staple remover, removes the staples, and then 3 hole punches each of the pages and puts them in a binder. So, if I did that for you, would that be better? Oh yeah, you can do that. Yeah, I can. You have to know how you're fitting in with everything in order to be able to help do your effort to make it easy for the others. So how do you like the example of, look at effectiveness in a system, the example in figure 3 where we're gonna try to collect money so that the league, the Sacred Heart League can go on and help people. Then he's got a flow chart in there that shows what happens, and he's got what he calls the 0 stage, where that's the come up with the idea. Well, I get a message and send it out to people, and then they got to formulate a message and go through all the steps that get it through the post office and into somebody's hands. And you look at that, and if you're looking for effectiveness, as Deming points out, getting the printing and the folding of the letters and getting them into envelopes with correct addresses on them and getting them out to people, and the postman delivering them and then getting into somebody's hands. You can make all those steps 1 through 8 and have them go perfectly, but you don't get any money because the message sucks. It doesn't cause anybody to do anything. So if you're trying to prove the effectiveness of that system, you're probably going to want to work on the message instead of the 6 Sigma thing, which might be work on the folding of the letters to make that go better. Any other comments that you'd like to share, Adam or Dennis? Or challenges? What's this crazy old man talking about when he writes this?
Yeah, I don't really have too many other comments. Looking forward to seeing, where the book goes, and exactly, I'll probably end up rereading the first couple chapters again once we finish, just to try to apply the later lessons back at the front. But yeah, no real comments so far. I like the how many examples get used, and it doesn't. He explains everything very well, the background that you need to know, but not having really any filler. Everything's kind of to the point and then next point. So looking forward to
Yeah,
it.
I'd offer that this as an introduction to Deming, this is a much better book than the first book he wrote. Out of the Crisis is a much longer book, and it goes into much more kinds of details, but it's I don't see it as inspiring and I didn't get as much insight out of that one as I've gotten out of this. And the rereading, I think is important. As I said, I probably read this thing 40 times, and still every once in a while I say, geez, that's been in there for how many years? And I never noticed that. And part of that's because I changed. My way of seeing things changes, and I'm able to see things I couldn't see before. Dennis, what about you? How are you doing? You've been through this before. Did you
I'm
get
with
anything?
you.
Did you
You
get anything
always,
new out of the first chapter that you hadn't seen before?
well, you always do. Every time you read it, things that you've missed before, or you look at it differently,
Yeah,
a different view also, as when I was working with it before versus teaching it. So coming at it with different angles that way too. So you always learn something new.
yes. I found out when I taught school that I was always able to teach people things, but I found out what they were learning and what I was teaching were different. So it's about learning and learn. That's Deming. When what I've seen when I look around and people who are either semi-familiar with Deming or some of them may have even been very familiar with his work and think they're doing what his work was. But what I sometimes notice is they have a belief that he is about numbers. In fact, there's a misquote everywhere in the internet attributed to Dem. Well, it's not a misquote because it's attributed to Deming, and he would never say anything like that. You know, says and I look at it and what 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 Deming's offering is a an opportunity to reconsider how we look at the world. You don't have to change how you look at the world, but if you change how you look at the world, you might see some new opportunities that you can use to your advantage. That I have seen a lot of things in this book that I have used to my advantage in various places. Well, I think I don't know, where's the clock there? 5:11. Well, it probably took us 15 minutes to get started. So unless somebody has more, I don't know, is Bill still on the line or is that going to create problems with our feedback?
Anytime Bill's on, there's always problems.
He's full of feedback.
Yeah, it's not just the feet. It's just... Oh, he is there. Oh.
All right. Well, thanks for joining. And we'll see what happens next week. I'll send out another reminder. And
Will it be the same link?
yes, it's the
Okay.
same link for the whole series.
Okay, good.
But there are, I think, 4 others signed up. But 3 of them are in time zones that make it inconvenient. 4 o'clock is midnight in the UK. And one of them, I think, is in Poland. At least his email ends in PL, where it's 1 a.m. So that may not be convenient.
Well, Tim, are you considering a different time, or are you going to stay with this time?
Well, right now I don't have anybody who's got that problem. I've got Adam and Dennis. They're not having difficulty at this hour, but I don't know what would happen. we have 3 people. They didn't get involved today, but they might listen to the recording and get involved next week. I can't tell. I know when we've run this before, we've had people in the UK and in the Netherlands and other places who have joined, even though it's they're 8 or 9 hours difference. So it's the middle of the night for them for sure.
All right.
I'm good with what we got. We'll hear from you guys later. Oh, and if anything pops up into your head and you want to ask a question, you can send a note to easiest places that I got it, that in tim@in2in.org. I can look at that and either take it up at the next session or offer you feedback right there in my email. Thanks for joining.
Yeah, and I got a note because I was looking for the attachment and I got something from Perry Woodford. So he
Yes.
helped too. So that was good that he helped out.
Yeah. Perry's good at keeping us in line. He joined my wife and I at the World Cup in Brazil. And my kid, we were down for the cup. Why not? It was a little disheartening in the semifinal though. Brazil lost 7-1. Oh well.
Only a number. It's only a number.
Yeah. And frankly, I think it is kind of a miracle they made it to the semifinal. They weren't that good a team. All right, then. As they say in Brazil, ciao. Até próxima vez. See you next time.
Thank you, Tim.
See you
Thank
next
you.
time. Thank you, Tim.
How do I undo this? Maybe I'm done already.